Hello, this is Dr. Flight. Good to touch base with you. This is going to be a session on big data and a little bit on where big data comes from, some sources of big data, and a little bit on marketing analytics. So as we move forward here, I want to just quickly define big data. It refers to an increasing volume of data. Note that big data is one of the characteristics is that it's continuously being produced, and its growth and existence is due in large part today as a result of digital processes. So there are four different things to kind of consider when you're evaluating big data to keep in mind. So volume. The sheer vastness and volume of the data, the amount of data that's available. The velocity, so this is the frequency in which the data is becoming available and how often that data comes into our database and our system. It can come in literally by the second or as any process brings the data to us. Variety deals with the different types of data. So when you are dealing with different types of data, the data has to be put together into one data set, and the data types oftentimes have to be the same for us to be able to make comparisons. So from a statistical standpoint, the type of data that you're getting matters and how that looks in the database. And then finally, the veracity. When we talk about veracity, we talk about how consistent the data is in terms of reliability and its validity. So in other words, is it true to reality, and is it consistent over time? So these four V's are good to keep in mind and to remember when you're beginning to evaluate your big data analysis, right? So another topic with big data tends to be this idea of data structure. Most data that comes into a data set will be structured data, and it is organized, or moreover, it has consistent data types and characteristics. So when you think about like the different types of data you can have, you might think of like nominal ordinal ratio or interval types of data, and each of those have specific characteristics associated with it. So structured data is organized and it has a consistent pattern to it. We usually use structured data when we do quantitative analysis. The other type of data would be unstructured data, and a lot of times when we use unstructured data, it might be something like comments that are made, for instance, on our website, or user reviews that are typed in where they don't follow a specific format or pattern, but we have to try to structure them somehow or organize somehow them to be able to analyze them. So qualitative data is often, in a unstructured format when it's first gathered, and then we have to analyze it and do something to it to better understand it. So keeping in mind, again, data type and what type of data is being stored is an important feature of big data, and more particularly how you're going to eventually use it and have it make sense to you. Okay, so now we're going to shift a little bit. We're going to talk about different sources for big data. Remember, this is data that's coming into the organization or being used, and it's accumulating in databases and data sets. So this is kind of an ongoing process with our information system that we've set up, and that structure or architecture of the system has to be able to support lots of different sources of data. So certainly a big source of big data is the data that's accumulated as a result of business processes. So we may do business, we may have a bunch of processes that we operate, and in doing those processes, we accumulate data. So CRM programs, customer relationship management or marketing programs, often are driven by data, but also are the producers of data as well. So that system that does our CRM is a source of and a use for our big data that we accumulate. Points of sales, so anything digitally captured from a sale that takes place, any other customer service interaction, any touch point that we have with a customer that can be captured is a way we can gather data. So beyond the proactive touch points that we create, things like tracking bots and cookies on websites help us be able to track customer movement, and that type of data, of course, can be saved and used later. Digital media, different internet devices and applications. So any web-related data, like what I just mentioned, tracking bots is something we can do. GPS location data, if we have access to that on a cell phone, for instance, or an IP address. Also, digital content. This is content that we've created that we have people see or watch or view. They can also share that digital content with others, and we can track that. We can also create apps for our company, which many companies have an app that they've created. Once somebody downloads that app and begins to use it, then that creates an enormous amount of data that then can be used or resold as something that we've done. Social media, again, keeping in the digital realm of things, we can certainly scrape data or import data from social sites, social media sites, so that we can get a feel for what people are saying about us, the buzz or sentiment about our brand, for instance, comments that are being made in reference to our brand, and so forth. That can all be captured using scraping data or scraping software, and then we can analyze that. Now, as you can imagine, that may be very unstructured. That's an example of unstructured data a lot of the time, where we have to then do some processes like qualitative analysis to better understand what those are. But digging into the social media stuff a little bit more, as you may know, social influencers can be used or levered to promote our brand in a hopefully an organic or way, so that viewers of social influencers will then hear our brand via the influencer, and that will create good positive feedback for us. We measure things like shares and how messages spread. We also think about things like brand communities when we start looking at social media. So groups of people who have a shared interest in our brand as a brand community. And this shared interest group can talk about our brand and reflect on our brand, things of that nature. And then, of course, peer-to-peer comments. So again, within conversations or within like messaging and things like that, we might be able to get information about our brand and kind of how it's being perceived. Other sources of information, we'll jump to third party or commercial sources. I'll pull that piece up there. So a lot of times, as opposed to data that comes from inside the firm or data that comes from social applications, we may want to go buy data that's been accumulated and stored and organized by a third party. So this would be like I hire a company, like maybe I hire Nielsen IQ and I subscribe to their service, and they provide me data. So commercial services provide data which has been collected using some type of a process that they've developed, and then they've sold that data to us so that we can then incorporate it into our database, our information system, and then use it. So there's two different types of commercial sources that are important just to know, at least the name for, if nothing else. Syndicated services So syndicated services are third-party clients or research companies that collect data, and then they organize it in a standardized format, and then they basically rent or sell that data to their clients. So you could subscribe to a service, for instance, that gives you data on your industry. Maybe it gives you sales data or trend data or things like that. And the data is accumulated on a very regular basis, and you get that information sent to you, and then you can incorporate that. But the point is that anybody who wants to subscribe to that service can do so. It's not like you're gaining a competitive advantage by subscribing to that service, because that same data is available to other parties as well, other companies as well. The other type of third-party data would be not so much syndicated, but something called packaged. And when we talk about packaged services or packaged data, it's data that's been developed and gathered using a very specific process in order to gather it. So I may hire a company, and that company can give me data, but they have a very specific process that they use to get the data that I specifically want. So it's process coordination that's the same across all of the different users. Now, in this case, I may buy a specific set of data, using their process that solves one of my specific problems. So by this way, like the data that I receive may be unique to me. It might be something that's specialized and specific to my process. Just as an example, there's a company called ESRI, and you can, if you want to, look them up or download this presentation and click on this tab here. ESRI is a geospatial data research company. So they use geography, and they use geographic landmarks and geological features to help identify places to sites for a business to locate to, or they do a lot of real estate work. Insurance companies hire ESRI in order to identify flood zones, for instance. But the process that they use deals with geological or geographical information systems, GISs. And so by that way, it's a very specific type of process that they use. And again, it's kind of a unique process. So each customer they have would hire ESRI to deliver data, but the data that's delivered may be different or changed depending on each client's specific needs. Okay, so moving on, lots of government agencies. So again, these are sources for data. Government agencies provide data that's open to the public, and that's one reason why we talk about it or mention it here. The census is, as you may know, collected once every 10 years. So there's tons of data available to this, involved and there for the census. It's obviously, because it's 10 years old, it can be very dated. And again, these are things that everybody has access to. So using this information won't generally give you an advantage, but it may help fill in some of your pieces there that you're missing. Yep, the NAICS is the classification system. So you may want to tap into that, or if you're sorting or searching for data within an industry, then it's helpful to know the NAICS code for any specific data that you're gonna look for. That's there. Other sources from the government, the American Community Survey. So the ACS was created because the U.S. Census is so outdated The ACS is gathered every year, once a year, and it's not a census, so it's a survey. It doesn't get information from everybody, but it's very accurate, and it can provide you lots of current trend information because it's developed and created much more frequently or on a regular basis. Other tools that you could use, the American Fact Finder. That's the actual like process if you want to search the American Community Survey, the ACS. And you can certainly search that or click on the tab. If you do a search using ACS, you may come across pages that kind of look like this, and you'll note that in the left-hand tab here, there's pull-down menus for specific searches. So you can look at you can slice the data by geography, by race or ethnic group, by industry codes, and you'll see it's fuzzy, but the NIAC industry is labeled here. So if you're doing industry search, you can look here. So again, it's an alternative to the census, yet it is still the government available, freely available data for folks to download. Other government sources, there's a publications site here, so you can like search for different publications. The statistical abstract of the United States could actually be helpful to you, except that again, it's very historical. So if you want historical data tracking back 20, 50, 100, 200 years, you can go to the statistical abstract of the United States and you can find information there. Each department within the government typically has a data set that's available. So the Department of Energy has the DOE has their energy price databases. So if you're looking for gasoline prices or heating oil prices or natural gas prices, coal, anything like that, that can be a source. The Federal Reserve, so economic data that's associated with our economy. Other available elements, if you want maps that indicate census changes and shifts, the tigercensus.gov is where you go. If you're looking for information on other countries around the world, the World Factbook is a good place to start. But again, the information is pretty generic. But if you don't know anything about a country and you're looking to maybe launch a product there, go to this website, learn a little bit about that country, and that will certainly help you. Other areas or other elements that aren't necessarily from the government, there are certainly data aggregates out there and different data portals. So CEO Express is just a straight up web page that has lots of links to to all kinds of business related websites. Secondarydata.com, polling report if you're interested in politics at all, those could be sources for you. The CES is the Consumer Electronics Society, and so the CES is a good source. Also, the CE.org, computerelectronics.org site here can give you some data relating to technology sales or sales of tech products in general. So consumer electronics. If you're looking for fun, you can certainly go to Sabre and do some baseball research if you're into Moneyball at all. So lots and lots of services out there. Some of them are easy to access. Some of them you have to pay for. You have to focus on with like syndicated data and commercial third-party data. You've got the internet sources that are provided through social media and also digital technologies that we've created through websites and apps, and then internal data as well. So as you can see, there's like a really lot. There are lots of different places where data can come from. Remember, all this data has to be accumulated, and they also have to come into one big area, your information system, so that you can then do some research and dashboards and some things like that. A couple other things, one specifically relating to secondary data. Much like any data, you want to evaluate the quality of the data as it's coming in. So anytime you do research, anytime at all, a lot of effort is spent on understanding how good our data is and whether our data is valid and if it's reliable. In other words, does it reflect reality and is it consistent? Those are the things that we really focus on a lot. That can hold true if you're doing primary research and if you're doing surveys and you're collecting data yourself, or if you're using somebody else's data. And in particular, when you're using somebody else's data, you want to answer these questions. So be clear to focus on these when you're evaluating secondary data. Ask, for instance, what the purpose was of the data that was collected. Like, why was the data collected? Who collected the data? What data was collected? So we focus on the data type oftentimes there. The method of data collection, how consistent the data is with other information we have. Okay, so if you're really focused on data quality, you need to ask these questions and make sure you really understand where the data is coming from, why it was collected in the first place, and so forth. When we focus on this idea of data consistency, what you might do is you may collect data on your own, and then you may have some secondary data, and when you put them together, it's something we call triangulation, where you've got data from multiple data sets, and if they all basically tell the same story, then that's a good thing. That's one thing we want. But if you only have one data source and that's all you're trusting, then you really don't know how strong that data is. So in other words, if you use multiple data sources and then you compare them and you look for consistency across data sources, then that triangulation process helps us verify and validate the data, and then we can make good, solid decisions as a result of it. All right, so we're going to shift gears slightly here now that we've kind of talked a little bit about big data and sources for big data. Once you have accumulated a lot of data, then you can start doing some data analytics to it. So data analytics is not a space or an area that we've done a lot of work traditionally in marketing. So this is more of a computer science area. However, over the last several years, analytics has become more mainstream, certainly across the different business units and absolutely within marketing. So even though you might not be a data scientist, it's healthy to know and have a background, at least a cursory understanding of what marketing analytics is and kind of why we use it and how we use it. So marketing analytics involves using a set of methods to identify and communicate meaningful patterns in data, and then have them help you make decisions. And there's 4 different levels of analytics that you may be involved with. Now, kind of like lots of different research where you do like exploratory research and descriptive research and then causal research, there's layers to this where you go from a simpler method to a more complex method. And that may absolutely be kind of contingent on your analytics ability. So like doing basic descriptive analytics can be very straightforward. Once you start getting into prescriptive analytics and even predictive analytics, then you're doing a lot of algorithmic work where you're doing some forecasting, and it can get pretty complicated if that's not your cup of tea. So kind of just understand that you may not be doing a lot of this. You may be hiring this out. You may be using data scientists to do this work. Or if you want to get involved with it, then there's certainly, all this that you can do yourself. So the degree of complexity in analysis grows as you get into this. And, it might be something that you jump into right away or you outsource. So looking at these 4 areas specifically, descriptive analytics provide a summary of insights, include sums, frequencies, averages, means, scores, things like that are specific performance metrics or key KPIs, key performance indicators. So descriptive analytics, again, this is something that that generally anyone can do when you're dealing with sums, frequencies, averages, means. You're just describing the data. And we're applying it to key metrics that are important to us as decision makers. Diagnostic analytics is that next step where you do beyond descriptive, you're really doing some causation type of analysis where you're looking for some relationships between variables, and specifically relationships between your efforts and your outcomes. So in other words, we're doing a bunch of things in marketing and we want to see how those things affect our performance, like our sales and our customer satisfaction and customer experience and loyalty and profit margin and stuff like that. So in other words, we want to be able to diagnose what components lead to positive performance outcomes. So again, this is something that most folks with some statistics can do. You're doing some correlation analysis probably, maybe some regression analysis, but it's generally pretty straightforward in terms of looking for relationships between variables. You may do some advanced work in cluster analysis where you're looking to group consumers on specific data. That's a little bit more advanced. You might do some factor analysis and things like that. Again, where you're taking groups or variables and you're combining them together or you're merging them together in a statistical way. But generally speaking, as I said, you're looking for relationships among variables, again, that will help you make a decision moving forward. Predictive analytics. Absolutely, we're looking to predict future results. So this is a forecasting element here where we want to predict the future. And then prescriptive analytics kind of goes hand in hand, but it extends predictive analytics a little bit more. So when we prescribe, we want to optimize our process. So we want to design optimal inputs for the best possible results based on the data and the history of the data and how the data relate to each other. So it's not so much predicting a static future, but what can we do to change the future in order to optimize our results? Okay, so those are those four levels. And again, when we start talking about marketing analytics, we can kind of work in these different four areas. Having the big data structured properly to begin with is the first step, and then thinking about kind of how we're going to apply the data to one of these four things, or maybe all four of them, is kind of the next step that we'd go through from there. Okay, so one last bit of information before we finish this up. You can sit here and you can pause this if you want, but there are a lot of different applications for big data analytics when it comes to marketing related processes. When we get to the predictive analytics stage, being able to build in some like algorithms or like artificial intelligence or some machine learning applications where the data comes in, and as a result of the data, some process of customization or personalization happens, which can then be sent to the user, the customer, for instance. Something like that would make sense. Again, beyond the customer, making sure we're optimizing our resources and the money we're spending in each of the areas of marketing is another way that we can use predictive and prescriptive analytics to help optimize our system and things that we're doing. Okay, finally, you can take a look at this chart. There are four different, in this example, there are four different types of marketing analytics, from CRM, which we talked about before, to retail analytics, social media analytics, and some other digital applications. It kind of describes the analytics that are involved in each of those four areas. It outlines some typical data metrics that you might be tracking, and then some specific applications. So like if we were to dig deep into social media analytics, this is like we want to analyze the data that's produced from social media platforms by consumers, and we might be measuring likes and shares. So those are two different metrics that might indicate the effectiveness of our social media campaigns. And specific applications may include the data that we have on patterns of shares once an organization makes a post. So, we're putting content out there. We want to analyze how that content is being shared and viewed, and ultimately liked among our consumers. And so if we put a piece of content out that is like something funny or clever, we want to think about how that's shared. If we do something serious and really like focused on maybe the technical aspects of our product, that's going to be reacted to differently. And so we can sort of like, as a result of the outcome, we can analyze the type of content that we're putting out there. So that might be like one application of social media analytics in general. So, all right. So this has been an overview of big data and the sources of big data, and then we shifted into data analytics just to kind of introduce it more than anything else, and kind of describe what analytics, the role of analytics has for the firm. So please let me know if you have any questions, and thanks for listening.